let's talk about the hemispherical rule. This is from FAR 91.159, and it's called the VFR. There's one for IFR as well, but we're going to talk about, because it's for private pilots, the VFR Hemispherical Cruise Flight Rule. So here I just have a little compass rose. I'll be using this here in a bit to explain this. So when traveling in cruise flight above 3,000 feet AGL and in VFR, pilots must do the following. So I just want to reiterate here that this is just for VFR flight. There's different rules for IFR. They're similar, but different altitudes, as you'll see. And in cruise, so VFR, cruise, and above 3,000 feet AGL. So if you're not in cruise, let's say you're climbing, you're maneuvering, then this doesn't apply. If you're not above 3,000 feet AGL, this does not apply. And if you're not in VFR, it doesn't apply. Other IFR hemispherical rules apply. So I just want to make that clear that this is specific to cruise flight above 3,000 feet AGL in VFR. All right, so what does it say? Well, if you're in cruise flight above 3,000 feet AGL and in VFR, you must, when on magnetic courses between 0 degrees and 179 degrees, so that's the east hemisphere direction, so any of these directions, fly at an altitude of an odd 1,000 plus 500 feet. So I'll give an examples of what those are here in a second, but I want to show here on this compass rose what these courses, these magnetic courses, so it's magnetic course, not true course, it's magnetic course we're talking about. So if you are flying on 0 degrees, you're going due north, this would fall in this category, right? Because it's 02179. So you'd have to fly at odd 1,000 plus 500 feet. Then let's say if you did 30 degrees, you're flying a magnetic course of 30 degrees here. That would also apply. Then 60, 90 right here, 120, 150, all the way to 179. Anything spanning, so if you're going in any of these directions spanning from 0 to 179, right, these kind of easterly directions, then you have to fly at an odd 1,000 plus 500, okay? Now, if you're on the western kind of hemispherical directions, again, that's 180 all the way spanning to 359, because 0 is considered part of this first requirement. So we would go only to 359. Any of these magnetic courses, right? So it could be 190, 210, 280, 270, 300, 355. Any of those magnetic courses, you have to fly at an altitude of an even 1,000 plus 500. And what this does, it's when you're outside of, maybe you don't have flight follower, you don't have ATC telling you, what altitude to be at and making sure that you're separated from traffic. This is an automatic kind of baked into the rules, a way to separate different traffic, right? So that way we're not all flying at the same altitude and creating congestions and dangerous situations. It's a way to kind of separate people who are flying in any of these directions, these easterly directions, and any of these westerly directions. So let's see, what kind of altitudes these might look like. In a little bit of visual, if we're traveling east, just like these aircraft, right? So this is obviously this is a two-dimensional figure, but east is to the right, west is to the left in this picture. So these guys are traveling easterly. Then what are some acceptable altitudes? And let's assume that 3,000 AGL is down here. So they're 3,000 AGL, they're in cruise and they're in VFR. It's nice and sunny. So what would be an acceptable altitude to meet this hemispherical rule? Well, they're traveling eastbound, so we want it to be an odd 1,000 altitude level plus 500 feet. So odd thousands are like 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 7,000 feet, 9,000 feet, 11,000 feet. So in this example, 5,500, because you add 500 to that, and 7,500 would be acceptable cruise altitudes to fly when you're flying in easterly magnetic course. All right, now these aircraft, these guys are traveling westerly. So what would an acceptable altitude be? Well, that's even thousands. So where before the ones traveling easterly were at 5,500 and 7,500, now we're at even thousands, like 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, but plus 500. So 6,500 like this one and 8,500 like this one. Pretty simple, but something you got to remember. One way we have the east is least that we remember. It's kind of a way to remember isogonic lines. Isogonic lines tell us the variation to correct from true course to a magnetic course, to correct for variation. So when we say east is least, if it's an east isogonic line, then it's a negative sign for us. We subtract it to our true course. So I kind of use that same here. East is least, meaning like the first one would be east. So starting at 3,000, right? Because that's where it starts. So east is least. That's kind of how I remember it. The east is odd. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but one way I kind of remember.